Today's, so thank you for those of you who are either listening or you're watching the replay when it becomes live. Today's, or this week's series was aimed at trying to, let's get a little bit of light on this so I actually look like I'm vaguely human today. Today's series, or this week's series, is about hamstrings. We have a lot of clients that come in, and predominantly with today's society and how we function and how we move, and basically how we're now a lot more of a sedentary group than we used to be. Excuse me. You'll find that a lot of us will end up with what we call tight hamstrings, and that has sort of knock-on effects as to how we function, how we move, depending on how tight our hamstrings are and what the issue is with our hamstrings. So I was going to start basically today looking at what the hamstrings actually are, where they come from, where they arise from, and how to tell if you've got tight hamstrings, and if you have tight hamstrings, how that affects how you move. So if you bear with me a couple of minutes, I shall run through a massively 101 of the hamstrings. So most of us know from a big group of muscles that we have the quads at the front of the legs. So all the muscles that come from the front of the legs and down are your quad muscles. They attach from the iliac crest, so the top part of your hip. They come down over the leg and attach just under your kneecap into the area on your tibia. These are the muscles that extend the leg. So as we're bending the leg and extending the leg, they're the quads. Hamstrings do the opposite effect. They bend the knee. Okay, your hamstrings start just under your sit bone. So if you're sitting down and you wriggle around, if you've got your hand under your bottom, you're going to feel your hamstrings attachment, which is, or your hamstrings bone, or the bone that the hamstrings take attachment from, which is your ischial tuberosity. So when we're sitting down, and we're sitting on our sit bones, the bone you get here, your hamstrings attach onto here. Okay, so the hamstrings take attachment from here. They have a little bit of attachment further down the leg for one of these short heads of the biceps femoris muscle, and then they attach and they come down and they attach over underneath the hamstring, underneath the knee at the back. Okay, so if we have a little look on the diagram here, we've got basically the back of the leg, and we've got the hamstrings that come onto the outside, which is your biceps femoris section of it. We have the semitendinosus tendon, and then we also have the semimembranosus tendon. So they are taking attachments right at the top where the sit bone is here, and they come down and they give us the definition and shape of the hamstring. Okay, so the hamstring consists, if you think of it, of three basic slips of muscle. You have the biceps femoris, which has a short head and a long head, and we have the semitendinosus and semimembranosus on the other side. As you can see, it crosses over the muscle at the back of the knee joint and inserts just under onto your bone of the shin. Okay, now with these here, it crosses over two joints. So it's crossing over the hip joint at the top, and it's crossing over the knee joint at the bottom. So this means the hamstring's got two actions. Okay, at the knee side of it, it can bend. So where it's attaching onto the back of the knee, it causes the knee to bend. Okay, where it attaches onto the bone of your pelvis, it causes the hip to extend. So we can use the hamstrings to extend the leg and bend the leg. Okay, and they can be used in one or the other. So that's a brief anatomy of your hamstrings 101. Also bear in mind that your sciatic nerve tracks at the back of the hamstrings as well, and it splits inside of the knee from just above the knee joint. So you can see from the drawing, obviously the bulbous definition at the back of the thigh is going to be your hamstring muscle. Okay. Now with the hamstring itself, we're either using it as a knee flexor or a hip extender. So, and it can be used as both. So if you think about the hamstring, that will start your hip extension, And then if you think about your glute max as maybe continuing on and then assisting with it a little bit further, okay? From a knee flexion point of view, obviously you bend the leg and it is working antagonistically with your quads. So it can shorten, which is a concentric contraction, so we're shortening the hamstrings, and it can lengthen or pay out for us with leg extension, which is an eccentric contraction of the leg. So if you think concentric is short, so it's concentrated, it's short, eccentric is long, it's elongating and stretching. Okay, so hamstrings basically, in a nutshell, attaches at the bottom of your pelvis on the pelvic bone, attaches on the shin bone at the back, splits either side because there's 3 different heads of the muscle, and then basically we can use it to bend the knee and extend the hip. Now what happens if the hamstring length is here, and that's a long hamstring? If we're sat all day, the hamstring inherently is never getting stretched, especially if we sit with our leg static and at 90 degrees. If we're also one of these slouchers, which you see most of us do these days, and we slouch and we sit behind our sit bones so we're all curled, same again, that distance here to here is getting shorter. So if I have my hamstring here to here, and that's it nice and long, if I sit all day, I get it shorter, and if I tuck under, it becomes shorter again. So then when I try and stretch it, it's going to cause one of 2 problems. It's going to pull on my back and going to pull me underneath, so it's not going to stretch that well, which can cause back pain. And then from this end of the scale, if I try and stretch it, I'm going to be quite uncomfortable because I'm not going to be able to get my knee straight into extension using hamstrings itself. So what does this look like when we're looking at clients? So I've actually got a very tight lower back, and I've actually got relatively long hamstrings. So if I'm stood in this place here and I tip forward, none of my movement for that movement is coming from my spine. I literally am hinging at the hips, which means my hamstrings, which are attached here, are stretching, and they're allowing me to do that movement because I'm stretching through here. Now, if I use my lower back and I don't use my hamstrings, my lower back just goes to there because, like I said, I'm incredibly tight through my lower back section. My lower back doesn't have a lot of flexion. To get any further, I have to let my hamstrings help me. Okay. Now, there's lots and lots of people who have a massive amount of lumbar flexion. So when they curl, most of their flexion is in their lower back, and what stops them getting any further is tight hamstrings. So what we're going to look at today as part 1 of this series is to maybe look at, if you find that you are struggling with your hamstrings or you think your hamstrings are tight, how do you know if it's your hamstrings, and how do you know if it's your pelvis? So that's what we'll go through. Okay, so what I want you to do first off is sit yourself right back in the chair, or right back in whatever it is you're sat on, whether it's if it's a couch, it might be a little bit uncomfortable, or you might be a bit squishy in there, but you want to sit right back in the chair, okay, and you want to sit as upright as you can. All right, now what we're going to do here is just sit our sit bone, fingers under our sit bones, and I want you to have a wriggle around so you can find the 2 bones underneath your tail. Okay, now if I'm nice and upright, I sit on the sit bones, and my sit bones sit nice and proud. Okay, so I'm in this position. Now if I curl, you'll feel that the sit bones will glide forward over your fingers, and technically what you're doing is you're sliding and we're curling backwards, so we're getting a curly round back position as opposed to a nice tall back position, so we end up with a flexed posture. Okay, so feel under your sit bones, have a wriggle side to side so you can feel where they are. What I want you to do is slump, so you're going to sit and curl back as far as you feel you can. Okay, your sit bones are now forward relative to your fingers, and your back is curvy. Okay, now we're going to sit up, and you'll feel your sit bones start to dig into your fingers, and then you're going to be in an upright position. Okay, if we keep moving our pelvis forward, so technically I'm sticking my belly out and arching my back, then my sit bones slip behind my fingers. Okay, so we want to find that sort of center posture. All right, now go behind, come up to center, go forward, come back to center. When you found that center posture, that's your start point, and your pelvis is in what we call neutral. Okay, what I'm going to do is straighten my leg out and come back down, straighten my leg out and come back down. And I'm looking, does my pelvis move? Now, as I've said to you, my hamstrings are relatively long. Okay, now what might happen is you get to straighten your leg out and you feel that you sink back. Okay, what we're looking at here is your true hamstring length. So we're looking at how far can you straighten the leg, keeping your pelvis still before this happens and you sink behind. Okay, so if you think that your knees are flexed at 90 degrees, which most of us can do, hopefully in that upright position, and then we straighten the leg out. At the point you can't go any further and you feel your pelvis is going to pop, you're looking at the angle that that knee is at. So is it at 90? Is it at 45 degrees? Is it at full extension? So it's 0. So we're looking at what degree of knee extension can you get? And you just want to rough eyeball it. Okay, so at 45 degrees here, that's my limit, and I feel that my pelvis is trying to stop me. To go any further, I really have to curl. Okay, now I know that from here to here, I can only get 45 degrees. Once I hit 45 degrees of extension, that's it. My leg doesn't want to move anymore, and I have to use my lower back and my pelvis to help me. So it tells me that leg is 45 degrees. On this leg, if I can only get to sort of 75 degrees, and then I have to go, it tells me that this hamstring is a lot tighter. Okay, so I'm just going to turn myself sideways on so you can see that a little bit easier. So if I'm sat, and I'm sat myself right here, I've got my fingers under my sit bones here. I find behind my sit bones, and I find on my sit bones, and I find forward of my sit bones, and I just want to sit on top of them. Okay, so I'm going to relax through the side and the back, and I'm going to extend my leg. Okay, now like I said, my left leg's my good leg, so I can get full extension here, and you can see my back isn't moving. Now my right leg's my dodgy leg, and I get to here, and I go, no, I can't do that, and I have to lean back a little bit. So now I know with my right leg, I can get to 45 degrees, so my hamstring is tight. So ideally, we're looking at can you get full extension. Use that as a marker point for today. If you're not sure, pop your hands on your hip. If we're testing people, we might come behind, and what we're looking at is feeling, do they push against us? So if you pop your hands on your hip, if I lift my leg, my hips aren't moving. If I lift my right leg, I feel that my hands, and I feel the pressure pushing back into my hands. So I'm looking at, do I need to curl and tilt my pelvis to be able to get that leg up? And you might find with some people, they're way back here and they can't get their legs up. So these are typically people that when we're sitting on the floor, they can't sit straight and they can't get their hands on the floor. Okay, they're sitting and they're back here and they can't manage to get their body up on top. Okay, so that's what we're looking for when we measure the hamstring. Okay, the hamstring goes obviously above the hip joint and the knee joint. So if we're stressing it at the top end and holding it static so it can't move and trying to stretch it at the lower end, we're going to hit a point where the body just doesn't like it. Okay, and what will happen is the body will lean backwards to accommodate it. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at hamstring length and how it changes. And you will find that there is a leg that is easier. You will find that there's a leg that's a little bit tighter, or it's a little bit tougher, or it's a little bit harder to then move. So with your hamstrings, what can we do with those? So depending on what the problem is. Like I said earlier, if your hamstrings are tight and you're having to accommodate it with your legs all the time, then what we're looking at doing is it can pull in the lower back, and that can cause us problems because then you're constantly on a stretch in your lower back, and as soon as you stretch your hamstring, it gets tight. So typically these are people who, like I've just demonstrated, can't sit up with their legs out straight, can't touch their toes, and if they're going any further, they just can't reach down with their legs straight. Okay, you might find if you've got your leg up on the bed and you're reaching forward, you can do it with one leg, but if you try it with the other leg, it just doesn't work. So that's when we're looking at tight hamstrings. For instance, in things like Pilates, feet in straps, when you're bringing your legs up on the reformer and feet in straps and trying to move, you find that you get a really strong pull along the back of the leg. So what are we going to do to start with that movement? If you have tight hamstrings, I would suggest that the main thing that you want to look at is make sure that for starters you have good pelvic mobility. So that's what we're going to go through today with your pelvic mobility. So when you are able and you're sitting in a chair, you want to tilt the pelvis back, which is going to be a comfy place for you. We want to come up into a little bit of neutral and go beyond neutral a little bit to get some range. So we're curling backwards and sitting upwards. Because most of us, and certainly with the youngsters these days, and if you spend a lot of time sitting, you're going to find that you've lost mobility in your pelvis. So this is going to be your start point for today. Okay. Now, if you find that that's quite easy, doesn't bother you too much, and you've got a little bit of mobility, what you can do is rest your heel out on the floor and do it when you've got a little bit of extension in your leg. So if you were doing this exercise side on and you found that you got to here, it might be worth then just trying to do that exercise with your heel rested on something on the floor that's lifted up a little bit. So you're already on a stretch. You're moving the pelvis forward and backwards, and you're doing it on a stretch so that you can mobilize the hamstring at the top end and again mobilize your lower back. Okay, so today's little lesson, or today's little class, was really to get you familiar with where are your hamstrings, what action do they do, how do you find them? They're at the top of your sit bone, they go either side of the knee, they bend the knee at the knee, and they extend the hip at the hip. Okay, they also control us as we bring the leg forward, and obviously they play a big part when we're doing things like walking, running, coming up and down stairs. They're part of obviously the activity of muscle when we're doing the antagonist to quads. So if you can work out, hopefully now you can, whether you have inherently tight hamstrings or whether you actually are also tight in your lower back. And then for tomorrow's masterclass, we will go through some basic stretch techniques that you can use and you can do. The one for today, while you're doing your seated stuff, your activity, if you're tight in your hamstrings, is just to keep your pelvis still and try and slide your foot away along the floor. So if I come side on again for you, keep my pelvis still and slide my foot away along the floor. So it's resting, and I'm trying to get it as straight as I can in that nice upright seated position. If you find that it's too hard for you to stay in that upright seated position because it's too much effort all the time, then I would roll up a towel and just pop it behind your back and just use that as a bit of a passive stretch for you. So hope you enjoyed today's masterclass. For tomorrow, the masterclass will be running at a similar time. I might need to do it around about 2 tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure. I might have an appointment booked in by accident, but I'll send a little message out in the Facebook group and let you know. So thank you for being with us today. If you have any questions, feel free to tag me. If you're writing them down, just tag me on there or flick me an email, and we'll cover them over the next 2 or 3 days. Thanks for being here.